Hello students, I'm Himani Sharma, your UGC NET educator. In this yet another new video on the Drishti learning platform, we are going to talk about the other variables which are there when we want to conduct research. So in one of the previous videos, we have talked about the independent and dependent variables, and I hope from that video it is really and pretty clear to you all what do we really mean by independent and dependent variables. We'll of course try to discuss a little bit again about them, because of course today we are going to discuss about intervening, control and extraneous variables which are used in our research, right? Confounding variables per se as well. So extraneous variables has another name as well, which we know as confounding variables. But why do we call them confounding variables is the question here, and we'll try to answer that question as well. So, first of all, even before jumping in here, let me just tell you that in the previous video, we talked about how independent variable and dependent variable, these two are really important when a researcher wants to conduct the research, because basically he wants to measure the effect of the independent variable, that is the cause, on the outcome or effect. So can you recall that I told you that you all are supposed to think in terms of the independent variable being the cause and of course the dependent variable being the effect. And one more important thing that I already emphasized in the previous video is this, that it is the independent variable which is always manipulated, right? So you can, wherever you are making your notes or you are revising, even if there is no point which is written here in your notebooks, you can write these pointers, because eventually this thing also has been asked in the PYQ only. So you cannot afford to miss these very updations. Now come back here again. Today we are going to talk about intervening, control and of course confounding or extraneous variables. But first we are going to talk about intervening variables. Why are they known as intervening? What do we mean by intervention? When we are interfering between something, right? Same is the case with an intervening variable which is there, which helps us to understand the relationship between independent and dependent variable when there is no such direct relationship between the two. So basically here this variable is invisible to the eye, but through the course of your research you will be able to identify it, right? And you will see that even if independent, the cause and effect, they are not directly related to one another, but there is something which is intervening and having an effect on the dependent variable, correct? This is what we did. Normally, though we know that independent variable, right? Smoking is the one thing which will lead to cancer, right? But there might be some other intervening variable as well. A person might be having one kind of health condition. So, any kind of variable which is coming in between the independent and dependent variable, that is known as intervening variable. It acts as a referee between the two and helps us navigate between the relationship that they both have. That is why they are also known as mediator variables, because they come in between these two variables which are majorly there, that is independent variable and dependent variable. Independent variables govern the dependent variables through the channel of mediating or intervening variables. So sometimes you won't know that your independent variable, the changes that you are making here, there are other variables which are also affecting, correct? But this one, pretty sure with the course of time in your research, you will be able to identify these types of variables. Now, I will give you a simple example here. It refers to the abstract processes that are not directly observable. Of course, told you that these are most of the times invisible to the researcher, these intervening variables, because they are intervening in the process of us getting to define the effect of the independent on the dependent. So these variables come in between, they intervene in the process. The researcher does not know a third variable is impacting or intervening, and it tells how and why the independent variable affects the dependent variable. Now let us just understand this pretty simple thing through an example here. That will be much easier for you. We know in the previous video as well, I asked you a question that which is the independent or dependent variable in the teaching learning process. So there we talked about the teacher with her or his changing teaching methods which are there. There we'll see a differentiation in the performance of the student. We'll see an effect of how she teaches on how the student performs, right? So independent variable here is the teacher, which is the cause, right? The teaching that she does, and the dependent variable, which is the effect, is the performance of a student. But of course, now the flashcards, the quizzes that I was telling you all about in the previous video, what are they working as? Or maybe the language that she is using. If most of the students are understanding in the English language in her class, they are able to process what the teacher is trying to tell. And that is leading them to perform well in the class. So I just wanted to see if my teaching has an effect on the performance of the student, but the language that I was using in the course of teaching also was having an effect on the performance. So of course, this variable was invisible to the eye, right? It was invisible to the researcher's eye, but it is helping us to establish that how the teacher is teaching with her language, it is having an impact on the performance of the student. Ab to clear ho gaya hoga, right? It's all clear now. We'll do other examples as well to see. According to research and data, the mortality rate of developed countries, developed I say, is lower than in developing countries because of advanced healthcare facilities. So of course, we'll see that the developed countries, we are saying let's just remove this very thing. For the time being, don't see this very mediator variable, do not see this. But yes, see, developed countries, they have less mortality rate. People die less in developed countries. If we see this through our common sense, we know that the mortality rate has nothing to do with the developed countries, but it is what the mediator, when the mediator variable comes into play, that is in the developed countries, people are provided with better healthcare facilities, and that is why the mortality rate is less. So of course, independent variable here was the cause, this was the effect, and this was the variable that was intervening, right? Now you understand again. If I say that there are less developed countries, being a developed country, we know that it cannot influence its mortality rate directly. But after introducing the mediator here, that is, we are giving them the better healthcare facilities, isliye they all are not dying, the mortality rate is really less. That is the establishment of the mediator variable that we were talking about. Another example here I could give you is that in the developing countries, right, or let's just say in the underdeveloped countries, they have high mortality rate, right? Because of the fact that here no healthcare facilities are there. That is why people are dying on a larger scale here. So here underdeveloped countries will be the independent variable, which is the cause, and high mortality rate will be the dependent variable, eventually the effect. And no healthcare is the mediator variable here. because it is telling us that because of no healthcare, people are dying at a larger scale in the underdeveloped countries because they don't have the sources to provide for better healthcare, right? Now, talking about the control variables, intervening, we are done with. Hope you all are understanding that very thing, right? Now, coming to control variables. Does red light affect plant growth? This is the question that I have in mind. This is my hypothesis that I want to check. Correct? Because in a research, you all need hypothesis. Now, independent variable, because we have talked about does red light affect the plant growth. So, independent variable here will be the light color, that is red, blue, etc. Right? Dependent variable will be the plant height. So, again, cause of red light on the growth of plant, that is the effect. Now, if you are going to measure two plants which are there, right? This is plant 1, this is plant 2. This is under normal light which is there. This is under red light. Now, you just want to observe the difference that does the plant which is, having the red light, does it grow at a faster scale? This is what you want to see. But you don't want to see the other relationships in different kinds of variables. You don't want to see if the soil is also affecting the plant growth. Correct? You just want to see the light and its effect. So, there are these variables. Control variables are the ones which you as an experimenter or a researcher need to control at your own end, so that you just see the relationship between independent and dependent variable and nothing else. So, you will put the same garden soil in plant 1 and plant 2. You will give them same amount of water. If I am putting 1 glass of water here in this plant at 2 p.m. Of course, I will be putting 1 glass of water at 2 p.m. here as well, right? I will keep them under same room temperature or any temperature that I am talking about, and I will observe them day or night time, right? So, if I am turning on the yellow LED light here during day, I will also turn on the red light here, but in the night, I will just switch both of them off. So, these variables need to be controlled because I just want to see the effect of the color of the light on the plant growth. And I don't want any other variables coming in between and confusing me to see if there was any effect, right? So, I hope this is also clear. Next comes the extraneous variable. Now, extraneous, if we go about through the dictionary terms, it means that any variable which is the one which if we are studying something which is the one which is not being dealt with, which is basically irrelevant to our research, correct? That is the kind of variable that we are talking about. Those variables are known as extraneous variables. We did not want to observe them. Any variable that you are not investigating, but it can affect the outcomes of your research study. If left uncontrolled, which means that if you know that there are certain extraneous variables in your research, you should control them. Here, in the previous example, these would have been the extraneous variables. If I had put, 2 glasses of water here and 1 glass of water here, that would have had an effect on my plant growth, correct? So, I did not want to do that, hence I controlled them. So, control is required. If left uncontrolled, it can lead to inaccurate results or conclusions about the relationship between independent dependent variable. Throughout our research, independent and dependent relationship which we are concerned with the most, right, that we want to see through our research. But if we are letting these variables be uncontrolled, we are not controlling them, then of course, even if we put rigorous amount of effort in the field of research, we won't be able to get to a result which is valid. That is why these variables need to be controlled. Now, let's just see through examples how and what am I trying to say. First hypothesis that I have here is memory capacity related to test performance? I want to observe the effect of memory capacity. So, here we will time and again try to see the independent variable and test performance will be my dependent variable. Correct? Test performance will be my dependent variable. I want to see the effect of how, well memory capacity treats the person and leads them to score good marks in the test. But there are certain other variables which are hidden. Test taking time of day, test anxiety, level of stress. If I give the students a surprise test, some of them might get anxious, some of them might get stressed, and that thing can have, even if they know certain things, at times students, they feel panicked about certain things. So if they feel panicked, they feel stressed out, even if they knew something, so that stress is now having an effect on their test performance and not their memory capacity. So the extraneous variables could be potentially harming our research to establish the relationship in which we were interested initially. Correct? Next question, next example, does sleep deprivation affect driving ability? So of course, here independent variable, sleep deprivation is the independent variable, it is the cause. We are going to see how it is causing to a person, how is it affecting the driving ability. So that is the dependent variable. I just wanted to see the effect of how, if a person has slept for less hours, that is affecting the driving ability. But there might be other reasons as well. If the road conditions are not well, correct? If the years of driving experience are low or maybe high, or the noise which is distracting the person while driving, that can also have an effect on the driving ability of a person, right? So of course, I need to control these very things there. Another example, does light exposure improve learning ability in mice? Mice here, choohe, right? So light exposure, of course, here will be the independent variable, and learning ability in mice will be the dependent variable here. Correct? This will be the dependent variable here. But the type of mouse, the genetic background of that mouse, or the learning environment in which he is learning things, that can also affect how is he learning things. So of course, these extraneous variables which we are not interested while we are doing our research, these can come between our relationship that we are interested in. We want to see the effect of independent or dependent. But these variables are coming in between and we don't want that to happen. That is why these variables need to be controlled. They can threaten the internal validity of your study by providing alternative explanations for your results. Because initially you started with one question in mind. You just wanted to see if memory capacity is the one which is related to test performance. But eventually when you were in between your research, you saw that it was also test anxiety, which led the students to perform badly in the class. So of course, it can threaten the internal validity that you had in your research. In an experiment, you manipulate an independent variable to study its effect on dependent variable. This is what we usually do, right? Another example here could be of an experimental study on mental performance. You test whether wearing a white lab coat, which is the independent variable that you have, and if wearing a white lab coat improves scientific reasoning. So scientific reasoning here would be the dependent variable again. You recruit students from a university to participate in the study. So you manipulate the independent variable, that is, some of them you provide some of them with the white lab coat, some of them you are not providing them with any coat, right? By splitting participants into two groups. Now we have two groups that we have talked about in the previous video as well. One group is known as the experimental group or the treatment group as well. which is receiving the treatment. So hence they are wearing a lab coat during the study. That is the treatment group. Second group that we have is the control group, where we are asking them not to wear any coat maybe, or wear a casual coat during the study. So this is a control group which is not facing the manipulation done by the experimenter with the experimental group. Correct? All participants are given a scientific knowledge quiz and their scores are compared between groups. So we are comparing the scores of the group, that was the 10 people that we had here who were wearing white lab coat. I'm going to compare their scores with those people, those 10 people who were not wearing the white lab coat. So I'm comparing the treatment or the experimental group with the control group. When extraneous variables are uncontrolled, it's hard to determine the exact effects of the independent variable. You wanted to see कि white lab coat का असर हुआ. If the white lab coat was the one thing which affected the students to score good in the scientific quiz, right? You wanted to see that. But if you did not control other variables, like we had other variables like might be there, which are extraneous, which are irrelevant, that can have another effect on dependent variable. So let's see here. Uncontrolled, we also talked about that they can have a potential harm to our research. So in your experiment, these are the variables. In the white lab coat experiment that we did on 2 groups, experimental group 10 people, white coat, control group 10 people, casual coat. This is what we wanted to see the effects of. Experimental group, control group. Now in your experiment, these are participants major. If a person who's in the control group, right, who's not wearing the white lab coat that we are talking about, but he is the one who has studied in the STEM field, right, the science, technology, engineering, mathematics, etc., right? So he will be having enough knowledge to solve any questions which are related to scientific studies. As if in the experimental group, we are having someone who is from the humanities background, but we were the ones who wanted to see if white lab coat had an effect on the scientific quiz, right? The answers that they were giving through in the scientific quiz. So that thing could be an extraneous variable. Participants' interest in science. People who in the experimental group could be the ones who are not at all interested in science, and people in control group could be interested in science, or vice versa. That thing can have an effect. Third is demographic variables such as gender or educational background. Some students might be the ones who are born curious. Even if they are from the humanities background, they want to learn about science. So what about them, right? How to control those variables? Time of the day of testing, experimental environment or setting. So these are the potential, let's just say extraneous variables which can hamper our research thoroughly, because we just wanted to see white lab coat ka effect on the scientific logical thinking. But now we are seeing that students who were interested in science, that is also having an effect. So we got confused between the relationship of independent dependent variables, right? So these variables should be controlled. When you control an extraneous variable, you turn it into a control variables. Now you here are seeing another fact. Control variables we did in the previous slides. Now when you are controlling these variables, extraneous variables, they become what? They become control variables. Now why are they called confounding variables? They are called confounding variables because initially we just wanted to see the relationship of IV with the DV, the independent variable cause with the effect. But with the advent of, extraneous variables in our research, they were confounding me. They were confounding the research. They were confounding, or what do we mean by confounding? They were confusing the relationship that we wanted to search about. They were confusing the relationship between independent and dependent variable. So if an extraneous variable is the real reason for an outcome instead of independent variable, it is also known as confounding variable. So if let's just say that stress was the one which was having an impact on math test scores and not the memory capacity, because initially I wanted to see the effect of memory capacity. So this was my independent variable, correct? But now through my research, I found out that it was not the memory capacity which was leading to the math test score, but it was stress which is leading to the student's performance in the maths test. So of course, we can see if they are the ones which initially we thought that they are not concerned in our relationship that we are establishing, correct, in the independent dependent variable. If they are found out to be true, the extraneous variables are found out to be true, they are also called confounding variables, because they confused or confounded the relationship that we were interested in. And what relationship we were interested in? We were interested in the relationship between independent and dependent variable, right? It can threaten the internal validity, already told you all about, and it can mask the effects of independent variable. Time and again talked about it. Now here, already told you that wearing a lab coat, this is what we wanted to see. This is the cause and effect that we wanted to see. But these other variables were also the ones which were affecting my outcome. Hence, they are known as extraneous variables. Now, certain PYQs, as always, statement assertion based. Assertion says that randomization is the best method of controlling the effect of extraneous variables in research. Reason says it results in the equal spread of effect of most of the extraneous variables. So, what do you think is the answer? You can pause your screens here and try to answer the question that is in front of you. The answer is option A. Yes, of course. Now, what do we mean by randomization? Randomization, even the reason is suggesting us that randomly you are choosing participants, correct? Even in the, any field, if we are talking about research as a whole, when we'll be talking about the probability, non-probability sampling techniques in the other videos that I'll be bringing forward, we'll in depth be dealing with randomization. So, randomization here means that you are giving the participants, whosoever are there, if let's just say 20 people are there in my classroom, I'm randomly picking out 10 people without having any bias. So, same is the case, randomization should be the one, and it is the one thing which can control the effect. And we have talked about how extraneous variables are supposed to be controlled, otherwise they'll threaten the internal validity of our research, correct? And the reason is because of the fact of the randomization that we are talking about here. Randomization ke saath we get equal spread of the effect. So, no one variable is affected on the other basically, correct? Next question, in a research study, the variable which is not directly measured or observable but whose effect is inferred or seen on the dependent variable is termed as what? Option C is the correct answer. Intervening variable, remember the example of the developed countries that we did, the developed countries and the effect on the low mortality rate, right? But there was this mediator variable as well, which was healthcare facilities. Correct? So, this is the independent variable, this is the intervening mediator variable, and this is the dependent variable. Even though independent and dependent are not directly linked, but they are having the relationship established through the mediator variable or intervening variable. Which of the following variables cannot be expressed in quantitative terms? The answer to this question is option D. Someone's professional attitude cannot be measured or expressed in quantitative terms because of the fact that it is subjective in nature. Correct? The behavior that I am having with my boss and the behavior that I am having with my colleague, they are both different. So, it is subjective. It is my own choice based. The experimental study is based on what? The answer to this question is pretty simple. That is, it is based on option A, the manipulation of variables. And which is the variable that is always manipulated? Write down in the comment section below. Which is the variable which is always manipulated in the research when we conduct it, right? So, I hope things were clear and pretty clear in this very video where I wanted to talk about intervening, control and confounding or extraneous variables altogether. Now, we are done with the variables things. In other video of mine, I will be bringing forward certain new concept which is important from the NET perspective. Till then, you all keep on studying. Thank you so much and have a good day.